A lot of times people want to colorize an image. Sometimes this throws the attention away from all the different colors in the image. Maybe I'm doing this to try to create some kind of harmony or unity with the big color that I'm using on the page. And quite frankly, a lot of times you'll see these used on movie posters, like hanging outside a movie theater. A lot of times they're kind of bluish or they're kind of goldish, sunset kind of colors. This kind of effect a lot of times can hide the fact that your image is not all that high of a resolution. There's three main different ways to do this. All of them get the job done. They're just each a little bit different. So I've opened up this particular image. On the first one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to quickly duplicate the image by going up to Image, Duplicate. So I'm going to give myself three versions of it. I'm going to start on the original one. First way I'm going to do this, I'm going to go ahead and add an adjustment layer. This is kind of the new way Photoshop suggests you do it. So on the layer palette, I'm going to go ahead and click on the black and white cookie icon. To pull down, these are the adjustment layers. I'm going to find the one that's called Hue Saturation. I'm going to go ahead, since I know what I'm going to do here, there's a lot of different uses for this palette, but I know I want to colorize it, so I'm going to click Colorize. Photoshop will automatically reset to the far left, which is a red hue. If I slid this over to somewhere about 270 or so, it's going to throw a purple light on top of the entire image. I could still tend to adjust the saturation and bring even more purple out if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that. I'll just do it a little bit. Maybe I'm going to go ahead and darken the image a little bit too. When I'm done doing this, it normally collapses the layer palette underneath this adjustment palette. So I'm going to click the layers so that it'll pop the adjustment back up into here and I can see what I've done. The original image has not been destructed or hurt at all. I have the black and white cookie layer icon with the hue saturation. There I go. I would go ahead and save this as a Photoshop file. I'm just going to call this 1. I'm going to leave this maximize compatibility button on. Photoshop will throw this up a lot. This is what's going to enable you to move back and forth between CS5, 556, and back and forth. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go ahead and just close that, but then I'm going to go find it and reopen it. Because at some point if I come back to this at a later date and I thought I liked it, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for, if I open the object up and I make sure that I'm on this layer and I click the adjustments, it's going to go ahead and show me you were at 270 and I cranked up the saturation a little bit and I pulled the lightness back down a little bit. So this allows me to continue to edit. And again, as I'm doing this, clicking on the layers button down here, it's all keeping this on a separate layer, so that's kind of nice. I'm going to go ahead and do a second version. This is another one that Photoshop would recommend. I'm back to the original image. On this one, I'm going to fill a layer on top with the color I want, and then I'm going to apply the blending modes to make this work. So I'm going to click a new layer. It's blank with the little gray and white boxes on it. I'm going to come to the color picker, or the foreground, and instead of mixing a color here by scratch, I'm going to go ahead and click the color libraries on this one. And I'm going to pull down, so probably the most standard Pantone color library is the Pantone Solid Coated. And at this point, I know I want to use color 268. PMS 268, a dark purple. I'm going to click OK. I want to fill this layer with that color, so I'm going to hit Command A to select all. I could go up to Edit Fill with the foreground color, or since it's already loaded up here, I can hold the little bitty Option button down and hit the Delete key. I'm going to then just hit Command D because I don't like looking at those marching ants. Then I'm going to come up to the layer blending modes and I'm going to change this from normal to color. I can play with the opacity if I didn't want that all to come through. But there I am. If I was to save this and want to come back to it at a later date, it's not as easy as the first one and how it'll end up showing that color. I'm going to close this. I'm going to come back and I'm going to reopen that image back up. So maybe I've been doing something else with some other project. So my color picker is now set at something different. What I could always do to figure out where I was at was change the color blending mode back to normal. Use the eyedropper, click on the color, that'll load it back up with the foreground. I could go back and set this to be color, and then I could click on this to explore more. Maybe my problem was that I wanted it to be a little lighter. So I could slide this back up, and this is all based on the original purple color I loaded back up. I could again hit Command A to select all, Option Delete to fill it with that particular color, and move on. The last version I'm going to move to is kind of the old-fashioned way of doing it. There's nothing wrong, it gets the job done. It's just not as flexible as some of the other ones. So I'm going to duplicate the background layer, and on this one I'm going to go access kind of the older way to access the hue saturation rather than using it from the adjustment palette over here. Both of these get the job done though. And you'll see a lot of videos that still use this. Image adjustment, hue saturation. Click my colorize button. It's going to go ahead and guess what color based on my foreground color. I'm going to say that's pretty close, but I wanted it to be about here, and I wanted to increase the saturation on it. I click OK. Job's done. The only problem with this is it has gone ahead and it has colorized this layer, fusing the color into the image itself. I still have my perfectly protected background layer, but if for some reason I wanted to come in and manipulate this at a later date, I'm going to have not as much success doing that. So I'd probably have to throw the background copy away and go ahead and start over on this one from scratch. And as long as I've got this open, I could do this on either the way with filling the color from this object or with using the first one I did where I was using the hue saturation slider. I'm going to go ahead and readjust this back into here. Another thing that you can do with this is, if you'll notice on the layer palette, when it throws this up, it throws up a white mask. The white mask means let everything come through. So it's colorizing the entire image. But if for some reason you didn't want to do that, I could zoom in, and I'm not going to do a very good job on this. But remember, white lets it come through. Black will go ahead and get rid of a color. So if I was to come in here, I'm going to pick a fairly hard brush, but one that's much, much smaller. I'm going to just pick 50 pixels to start with, maybe even smaller than that. If I was not on the background picture, but if I was on this hue saturation mask and I'm painting with black paint and I started to come through here, I could go ahead and I could paint these people out, which basically means don't include me in the mask. And obviously I would be wanting to change the brush size and all kinds of other things to do this, and I'm just going to sloppily do this real quick. But also remember that if I've done this and then I decide at a later date that I didn't do a very good job, always just look at the colors on your layer mask for the most part. Black means it's killing it, so if I flip this to white, I can come back in and I could re-edit this or say, yes, I do want the purple color to come through on that. So again, just kind of a variation on that. You'll see that used a lot when people are trying to paint people's lips red. Take a picture and turn the whole thing black and white, but leave a pair of red shoes or leave the color of the dog. People will do that also to add blue eyes to people, lipstick, all kinds of different types of things like that. So again, this was colorizing a layer. 3 different ways to do that.